Thank you very much for your time today. I've been very much looking forward to our conversation. And I might get things started by asking you what one question about your employees you wish you knew the answer to that you don't know the answer to today.
Yeah, it's a really good question, I think, Gareth. And I don't know that there's one specific thing that I would say, I want to know the answer to. I think in what I do, it's something that's constantly on my mind about, how are our employees feeling, not just thinking, but how are they feeling about our business. And I think, if I reflect on our organisation and how we manage things at Judo and our culture, we're a smaller organisation, so I think it makes it actually quite easy in some ways for us to wrap our arms around kind of how our employees feeling. And if I compare and contrast that to other organisations I've worked in, where you've got a global workforce and you've got different languages and different time zones and different those sort of things to kind of deal with, it makes it harder to kind of understand how your employees are feeling. But for us, and I think a huge focus on us, how we manage the culture at Judo is really having our finger on the pulse and trying to understand, how employees, are feeling. And we can do that really easily, I think, because of our size. I think, if I had to pin it down into one thing, I would say I would want to know exactly what they think about the leaders within our business, because I think leadership really, and that's a hard thing to sometimes get underneath for various reasons. Again, harder in a global, multi-site workforce kind of situation. Again, for us, a bit easier because we're smaller and we can do that. But what employees and how they feel about how they're being led, I think, is really hard, can be really hard to get underneath. And if I had a magic way of really being able to understand how employees are feeling about their how they're being led, not about the people and a personal thing about their leaders, but how they feel they're being led, I actually think that would be hugely useful. I think the other thing, as I think about that question, is people, in my experience, employees tend to talk about the stuff that's not working sometimes. That's the natural default. Our brains are wired for negativity, so you tend to hear more about the negative stuff sometimes. But if you really getting underneath, what are we doing well? People just say it's great, or the culture's great, or this is great, but understanding what we're doing well, so we can keep doing the things that are working. I think that's often one of the things, I know that myself in customer experience, and I get asked what was great or what was bad. I'm more often than not, I find myself, giving feedback. If I've been asked as a customer on something, if it was negative, I actually try and force myself to say this bit was good and it was a positive experience, so that organisation knows, we'll keep doing that. Because I think our disposition is to call out the negative, and calling out the positive is just as helpful. So trying to draw out through informally and formally what's the stuff we do well, so we can just keep doing it or building on it.
It's interesting, isn't it? And I wonder how different types of cultures in different organisations look at things like leadership and, I guess, focusing on positives. And I wonder if the two things are related. I also wonder if that varies across different markets. So, for example, in a US organisation versus Australia or British or an Asian country, where, for example, in China or Southeast Asian organisations in Southeast Asia, whether that varies as well.
Certainly in my experience, and certainly in my last role, it was a global role, and that there was huge variation across. You had language, differences, obviously, but just cultural differences around people feeling comfortable to say positive and negative things, and you have to be really aware of that when you're asking employees, again, either formally or informally, essentially for them to trust you to share the positive and the areas for improvement, so you can try and shift the culture and make the whole organisation a better place to be.
We've also seen differences in that between frontline workforces and people who are working in the support parts of the business, and how they relate to things around leadership, and in particular about, I guess, frustrations with different roles when things don't work properly. So it's a really, really interesting point. I guess another question is, what part does employee insights play in the success of your business at Judo Bank?
Oh, like a huge part, and as you know, we've just launched our new Jedi tool, our Judo employee kind of listening tool, if you like, which is a real-time way for us to understand how our employees are feeling. We're super excited about it. We're only in week 2 or 3 of our launch, but it is it's very new for us, but last Friday I got the first lot of verbatims out of the system. We'll get a report on that every week, and it's just hugely insightful about how people are feeling in the business. As I've been told, the trend is our friend in this sort of experiment, if you like, within the business. Yep. I've certainly never done it like this before. And I think the answers will reveal themselves to us, I think, as we work our way through the process, and how do we use the data to help, I call them nudge, kind of help us nudge ourselves in different directions. I kind of look at it as like the leadership team and the senior leadership group in the business are steering the ship, but we have to make little nudges. I call them nudges, a little bit left, a little bit right, a little bit over here, that are very nuanced and thoughtful about how we manage things within the business, and the employee insights that we're going to get, both from a quantitative perspective around trend on engagement and likelihood to stay, or intention to stay, around resilience and mental and physical energy, as well as the verbatim comments, are going to help nudge us, I think, in different directions.
I think you're exactly right, Megan. I think we're charting new ground with this, and I think it's really exciting to be able to look at a gauge and know what percentage of physical energy people have at work and how they feel with the brand and all sorts of things. But I think it creates discipline around the pace at which we look at that information and apply changes, because there's a risk of always being reactive to things. But I think looking at the longer term trends is super important. But it's exciting, and I've been amazed at the amount of engagement in the first few weeks that we've run the project. So it's been amazing, and we're very appreciative of Judo Bank going on the journey with us. So if we're talking about employees, what would be, you say, the non-negotiables with your employees?
I think for us at Judo, our absolute non-negotiables are, we are a values-led organisation. So we have our 4 values, and they are they're completely non-negotiable for us. So trust, teamwork, performance, and accountability. We try to frame up decisions that we make within the business around those four values, and that we are a people-led organisation. And lots of organisations and companies, in my experience, use that language, but how that necessarily plays out in their business isn't always the same as how they perhaps intended it to be, and people aren't always at the front and centre of decision making. I think COVID actually helped probably lots of organisations to reframe that. They really had to realise that, they really began to appreciate that if you don't look after your employees, they're not going to look after their customers, and that there's a direct correlation between the two in business performance. So for us, being values-led and people-led is a non-negotiable for us in how we, and how we manage the business. How does that play out? That plays out in decisions we make about how we're going to come up with different projects and initiatives around people, how we're going to make decisions about how work gets done, and how we're going to communicate with people.
Yeah. And what do you just say is the hardest part of the job that you do?
The hardest part of the job that I do, I think, I don't know that I describe it as the hardest part of my job, but it's not necessarily apparent to people. Is you're doing a whole lot of stuff often in the background, influencing, making those little nudges, I call them, nuanced nudges, and influencing in the background around direction. It can be about business direction, it can be about direction around culture, around people, it can be a multitude of different things, and you're often doing that you know, sometimes from the front, but sometimes also from behind, and helping people understand that can sometimes be a challenge. Yeah, that I would say, yeah.
Kind of like an iceberg effect, where you see the little tip above the surface.
Yeah.
People don't understand that the majority of what's going on is underneath.
Yeah, I think so. That's certainly my personal experience, you know, doing what I do, agnostic to the industry or the business that I'm working in. I've certainly, this isn't hard for me at Judo, but I have to in no way, shape or form fight to get the people agenda and the culture agenda on the table. Like, it's just not even up for discussion. That's not the case in every organisation. In fact, I sometimes say that to people who are thinking about joining organisations or leaving organisations is, you know, a great question to ask is, how hard does the P&C or the people function, or anyone for that matter, have to really fight to get the people agenda on the people on the agenda of the business, not just in the, you know, 5 minutes of the HR update in the executive meeting, but actually on the agenda. How hard do you have to work to get it on the agenda? And if you don't have to work very hard, that's a good thing in my view, because then you're not expending your energy on working to get people on the agenda. You're actually just on the agenda, and you can talk more in detail about people and culture.
And what do you think leads to disengagement to people that work in your industry? Not specifically Judo per se, but just generally within financial services and the banking industry.
I think my observation would be, and my experience has really been really only at Judo from an industry perspective, a short time in another institution. And my observation would be, really, it's very regulated. There's a lot of compliance requirements, which are understandable, of course. But I think helping employees or building processes and systems that are efficient, that deal with a number of those requirements from a compliance and regulatory perspective, that make sense, that are intuitive to not just the bankers, but anybody working in the business that has to touch any of these processes, that are not bureaucratic, that enable them to spend more time with customers. I can see that when that's not the case, it's hugely frustrating for particularly frontline employees who want to be doing less of that, doing it absolutely, but in an efficient way, so they can spend more time growing the business and helping customers solve their problems.
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess given we're measuring productive time as one of the things that we're tracking through the JEDI program, and I certainly think that some people cope very well with bureaucracy and being able to do a lot of process things, but for other people it's complete anathema. I'm probably in the latter group, Megan, but yeah, it sucks the energy out of me. But getting the balance right when you're running a bank, you want to believe that your bank is doing all the right things as well. So I can imagine that would be really challenging.
Oh, it definitely is. And context, I mean, context is so important in any business for people to understand. And sometimes you can put processes in that are required, but if a banker hasn't got the context as to why, as well as the process doesn't run as well as it should, they're like it has a double whammy effect in my experience. They don't get the why, and then the how you do it is really poor.
Yeah.
So it's a poor experience for everyone, and ultimately who loses in all of that? The customer, because they've got less time with the banker, and then the business lose. I mean, it's all round. It's just not a great situation.
Yeah. Maybe another example of the iceberg effect, where we sometimes talk about front of stage and back of stage, and the two need to be kept quite a long way apart. But that makes complete sense. And thank you very much for your time today. They've been really insightful look at some of the things on your plate at Judo Bank. So thanks very much.